So welcome to the Think Outside the Box ADHD and Planning Masterclass. As I said, my name is Sean Roney. I'm an ADHD coach and life coach, and I love talking all things neurodiversity and ADHD or ADHD tendencies. So I know people will ask, why a class on planning? Here's why. Most of the inquiries I get in my inbox start with the question, I'm really struggling with planning. Like for whatever reason, I have a really hard time making a plan and sticking to it. So here's why we're doing this class. Result. Okay, so think about that again. I'm going to read it slowly. Planning is the ability to think about the future and then mentally anticipate how to create a specific result. Most planners are created by people who love planning. This is my belief. For people who don't like planning, right? So if we were to take a poll and ask everyone, like, how many planners do you have and how many do you use and how many have you tried? What's your favorite? In my experience, we, the neurodiverse bunch, tend to buy up all the planners, thinking that it will be a solution for our brains, which don't actually love following the path of a planner. Therefore, we're going to do this class and talk about it a little bit, why that might be the case. We do need the skill of planning, right? And planning falls under what is called the executive functioning part of our brain. So our executive functions are behind what's called our frontal lobe or our prefrontal cortex, right behind our forehead. We need the skill of planning, and these are some reasons why we need the skill of planning. Grocery shopping, making a list for groceries, cooking, following all the steps to like cook and prepare a meal and navigate all of the timing that's involved with that. Packing a backpack for school, right? If you're a student, cleaning your room, knowing where to start and what to work on first and then what to work on last and how to group things and gather things. All of that requires the skill of planning. Executive what? So you might have heard just a few moments ago, I said the word executive function. ADHD, ADHD tendencies, and neurodiversity have to do with what's called executive functions. It's a part of our brain that controls some really specific areas that are related to time management, the ability to prioritize, the ability to plan. Emotional regulation is managed by our executive functions. So a number of different areas, right? The ability to self-regulate and like notice and tell how we're feeling and how we're acting in the world, that is managed under our executive functions as well. Working memory is another executive function. Flexible thinking is another executive function, and the ability for self-control. Also, organizing, planning, I've mentioned many of these, prioritizing, starting tasks. So the ability to start a task and stay focused on it all the way through the end of it. So starting the task is one part of executive function, and then sustaining our attention all the way through it utilizes another executive function, right? Paying attention, the ability to stay focused when there's distractions going on in the room around you. Regulating emotions, self-monitoring, which really just means keeping track of what you're up to. So how many of you have gone through a day feeling like you're working really hard, you've been really busy, and then you get to the end of it and you think, oh my gosh, what happened to the day? Where did it go? What did I do? That would be that self-monitoring or lack of it, right? Lack of an awareness around it. So these are all executive functions. And when we have ADHD, or what I refer to as ADHD tendencies, we can have challenges when it comes to our executive functions. Okay, I just love to share this picture because when there are executive function challenges, there are planning challenges. And so, as I've mentioned before, I don't see Post-it notes or visual cues as a problem. But if they're organized like this across our computer screen, clearly they would be, right? So even if we are jotting down things and trying to remember to remind ourselves to do them, if there's not a way to organize it all, it can feel overwhelming. We can lose our place. we can drop balls, deadlines can get missed, et cetera, right? Okay, let's talk about this word neurodivergent for a minute. Neurotypical and neurodivergent. So neurotypical is what the term that I use to refer to individuals of typical developmental, intellectual, and cognitive abilities. Okay, so neurotypical brains tend to be much more linear. It's what we often refer to as our left brain people, people who are there's a straight line from point A to point B, right? Time moves in a very linear fashion for people who are neurotypical. Systems of organization are very clear for people who are neurotypical, right? Neurodivergent is the term that I like to use to refer to people who are more right brained, more creative. You can see this represented visually on the screen. So, more artsy, creative, out of the box thinkers tend to be neurodivergent, right brained. And neurodivergent is really a term that's used to capture many different brain makeups. So, not just ADHD, it can refer to autism, it can refer to Asperger's, it can refer to many different different brain abilities, is the way I would say that in the human species. It's not a pathological term, which is what I like about it. ADHD was created by the medical community, the term, and it stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It used to just be ADD. I like to bring this up at this point. They're the same thing. Things have just changed as far as the way we talk about it and the way it's referred to. So sometimes you'll hear someone say, "Oh, I don't have ADD," or "I don't have ADHD because I'm not hyperactive. I have ADD." That's kind of a fallacy. ADD was an older term. The new way to talk about it when it comes from a medical approach is ADHD, and there's 3 different types. So the first type is hyperactive impulsive. The second type is considered inattentive, and the third type is combined, meaning you have a little bit of all of it, right? So ADHD is now the preferred medical term. Again, preferred medical term. It is categorized as a disorder. That is what medical terms are for, right? Because then they require treatment of some sort. And typically in a medical community, the primary treatment for ADHD is medication, also combined with some type of cognitive behavioral therapy or coaching. Again, a pathological term, right? So neurodivergent, neurodiverse is just describing a different way our brain might function, and it's not pathological. It's a term that basically is saying nothing's gone wrong. It's just a different way that your brain is functioning, differently abled, not disabled, right? There's a difference there in the way we choose to think about it. What else do I want to mention about that? There was one other thing that just was on the tip of my tongue. It'll come back. Or not. If it's important, I will remember. All right, so neurotypical, neurodivergent. Questions you have about that, be sure to jot them down. And then once the presentation is over, I'll open it up for Q&A and I'll be able to see your questions. All right, let's go over some points. A primary reason we struggle with planning when it comes to ADHD are 3 things. The first thing is not knowing when to start, okay? So when we have more neurodiverse tendencies, it can be hard or challenging to know when to start something. Why? Because our brains operate kind of in an urgent, non-urgent fashion, meaning something is either, oh my God, on fire, urgent, 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 or our brain is completely kicked back and chill and like, it's not yet. I don't have to worry about that yet, right? So one of 2 modes, urgent or not yet. And so when we're operating in those 2 modes, in order to get into that urgent section, we need to have some outer deadline, right? So I'd say 2 things kind of push us into urgency, either a hard outer deadline or the fear of God, meaning fear that someone's going to be upset or there's going to be a consequence that you care about. Those are 2 things that can really get a more neurodiverse brain moving. And the reason is it just moves the brain, the thinking closer to that sense of urgency. So not knowing when to start and relying on the feeling of urgency is one reason we struggle with planning. We may plan it and put it on the calendar. And if we're not feeling the sense of urgency, then what our brain is essentially telling us is it's not time yet. It's not time to start unless we feel urgency. Okay. The second reason a more neurodiverse brain struggles with planning is sustaining our attention once we do actually start can be hard because of executive functions. So let's say you figure out when to actually start something, to actually keep your interest going all the way through it until you finish is part of what executive function challenges can throw a wrench in, right? And I just realized I can open up the chat while I have the presentation going. Dun dun. Okay. Hopefully that won't be distracting. I think having the numbers there will be more distracting. All right. Yes. So I see that people are relating to some of that. So sustaining our attention once we do get started can be hard. Keeping distraction at bay can be hard. Once we start and we've taken that leap and we're like moving through the process, all of a sudden, if we hit a point where our brain is bored or less interested or a lull, all of a sudden, anything in the outer periphery can become a shiny object and pull us off course, right? So the ability to sustain your attention through a task, even if it's not fun, exciting, shiny, and new, is an ability of a neurotypical brain, and it's managed in our executive function area of our brain. I hope that makes sense. The third reason planning can be hard when we have a more neurodiverse brain type, we don't know when to stop. So it is a fallacy that ADHD is a lack of focus, lack of attention, right? It's actually interest-based attention, which is a much different thing. So I don't know if you've had the experience of becoming hyper-focused on something when you have gone down a rabbit hole or you've like started to investigate something and all of a sudden you find yourself in the weeds and it's like 5 hours later and you're like, what happened? You look up and it's dark outside. That is called hyperfocus. So hyperfocus is when you're looking at something and you're focused on it to the detriment of everything going on around you. So these are the three challenges that come up when it comes to planning: not knowing when to start, having difficulty sustaining our attention when we do, and then not knowing when to finish. Okay. Okay, here we go. Question, not a joke, but kind of sounds like one. What tells you when to stay oh, sorry, I'm not reading my slide very well. What tells you when to start, motivates you to keep going, and forces you to finish? It's a question. So I want you to think about it. And if you come up with the answer, pop it in the chat. What tells you when to start, motivates you to keep going, and forces you to finish? Does anyone have a guess? And it's not a riddle. It sounds like the black and white and red all over riddle. Tells you when to start, motivates you to keep going, forces you to finish. Your attention, good guess, good guess. Planning, good guess. In my experience, the answer is a complete surprise. Deadlines, my calendar. I love all the guesses. Haven't quite hit on the answer yet. Okay, here it comes. Procrastination. Think about it. We give procrastination a dirty word. Society gives procrastination a dirty word. When I say procrastination, tell me what comes to mind in the chat for you. Just saying the word procrastination. What are your thoughts about procrastination? And Kate, yes, I see your comment. Sometimes you can't sustain a task because your mind gets too fatigued with making so many choices. Yes, decision fatigue is a thing, right? Making so many decisions. So when I say procrastination, what comes to mind? Lazy, laziness. I do it all the time. It's never thought of as a good thing, right? Procrastination is a dirty word for many people. For us, it's not really. Procrastination is the answer because think about it. When we procrastinate, what we're doing is we're waiting right up until the deadline of something. So something is due, there's a hard deadline. We procrastinate. The whole time leading up to it, our brain is the switch is flipped to not yet. It's like, not yet, not yet, not yet, not yet. And then all of a sudden, it's like the day before something's due, right? And our brain like flips the switch to urgent. Oh my God, it's now. We need to do it now. And so it tells us when to start right before a hard deadline, right? So that's one reason that procrastination serves us, one way that procrastination is serving us. The second thing that procrastination does for us sustains our attention. So a more neurotypical brain has the executive function that helps them to sustain attention and keep going. For our I want to say for us, for a more neurodiverse brain, procrastination sustains our attention. We have to keep going. We have no choice because the thing that we procrastinated on is due tomorrow, much of the time, right? So it's like, nope, have to keep going, have to keep going, have to keep going, got to get it done, got to get it done. And we like stay in that cycle of urgency the entire time until we finish. That's the third thing procrastination does. The third purpose procrastination serves is it can tell us when to stop. So when I was talking about hyperfocus earlier, right, and being hyper-focused on something, procrastination can pull us out of that because the deadline's there. So we've waited so close to the hard deadline that if we do go into hyper-focus mode and we're really concentrating, right, and to the detriment of everything else, and then we hit the deadline and it's time to turn the thing in, we're like, okay, that's it. We have to stop. We work as hard and fast as we can right up until the deadline, and then we stop. So the three ways that procrastination serve us tells us when to start, keeps our attention the whole time that we're working on something, and it tells us when to stop. So procrastination is neutral to me. It's like a circumstance. For those of you that are familiar with the model, for those of you that aren't, you'll hear a little bit more about it on the coaching portion of the call. Procrastination can just go as a fact, a circumstance. It's the facts of it would be waited right until the deadline, right? And then we get to choose how we want to think about it. We can choose to think, I'm lazy. Why do I do this to myself all the time? I'm lazy. My guess is that's not going to feel very good and it's not going to create a very solid result for us. Or we could choose to see it for what it is. Like, of course, my brain procrastinated. That is what it knows. That is how it knows to get started, to keep going, and to finish. Once you know that about your brain, you can stop judging it and just start choosing differently. It just becomes another decision you can make. Not an easy decision, right? But it is a decision that you can make. All right. So this is just a review of what we just said. By waiting until the last minute, we know when to start. That's right before something is due. It sustains our attention. We have to, or else we won't finish in time. And we know when to finish. There's a hard deadline with consequences. So if we don't finish, we're going to pay a consequence. Okay, let's talk about these two terms that don't come up very often. This is another thing that is common when it comes to neurodiverse or ADHD tendencies or having ADHD. The term is blindness, which is literally the lack of awareness around the passing of time. So time, the way I like to talk about it is time feels a little slippery for us neurodiverse, meaning there are moments when time feels like it's flying by, like when we're in that state of hyper focus and you look up and realize 8 hours have gone by and you didn't notice that you hadn't eaten, you hadn't stopped to take a break. You were just in that state of hyper focus and you didn't notice that 8 hours passed. It also can creep along. Blindness can happen in the sense that it feels like it's moving much slower than it is when our brain is hyper focused on what we're doing, if it's something that's not enjoyable. The other way this shows up, time blindness, and it's a little bit of magical thinking, which is the next term, a lack of understanding around how long something will take. This really can cause a problem when it comes to planning. So in most planning systems, You will be asked to determine the tasks that you need to do and then determine how much time you think each one will take, make a decision around it, and then to plug them in on a calendar, and then to honor yourself and your calendar and show up and just do the thing. That is what is often taught when it comes to planning. Here is what I will say about that process if you're more neurodivergent. You can make the list of things that you think need to be done. Let's say we do get that far. Then where the challenge can come in is deciding how much time it's going to take. Because when you literally, your brain type has a lack of an understanding around how much time something takes because of a part of your brain that usually determines that for neurotypical people, you may guess an hour. And my experience for myself and with those people that I work with is that when we guess an hour, it's more than likely going to take 2 or more, maybe even 3, right? So I automatically instill a times 2 rule. I suggest if you anticipate that something's going to take you 30 minutes, just go ahead and give yourself an hour. If you anticipate it's going to take you 2 hours, go ahead and give yourself 4 hours. Because here's what happened. Here's what's happens. If you give yourself an hour and it takes you 2, you tend to make it mean that you move much slower than most people or that something went wrong or you didn't account for it in your planner. And so it throws your schedule off as soon as you're out the gate, which can be really frustrating also. The worst that can happen if you think it's going to take 1, but you actually give yourself 2, is if it really does take 1 hour, you've just gained an hour, which feels amazing. You have bonus time, which is rare for us. We always feel like there's not enough time. It's a common thought when we're neurodiverse. If you think it's going to take an hour, but you plan for 2 and it actually takes 2 hours, your brain still sees it as a win. Like, oh, okay. I'm surprised it took me that long, but I'm glad I had the time to do it. Right. So that's why I suggest just automatically practice doubling your time or even tripling it. If it's really, really slippery for you, try tripling it and then backing down to double. The more you do it, you will start to actually notice how long things take, and then it will get a little bit easier to predict. The magical thinking starts to go away, and you will start to have a little more actual experience and data to base your decisions on. All right. So let's just look at this now. When it comes to planning, we talked a little bit about this. Decisions is step 1. So decide the result that you'd like to create. And this is just a very basic format, what I like to refer to as unplanning. Decide the result that you'd like to create. You can pick a personal result, a professional result, or both. I actually don't suggest focusing on more than 1 or 2. So either pick personal or professional or 1 for each. And then decide a time frame. So I like to go with annual result, monthly result, weekly result, daily result. Okay. And what this looks like loosely is, let's say I'm going to choose professional and I want to create a result by the end of the year professionally, whether it's working for someone else or working for yourself. What is the result that you want to create? Make sure it's measurable. It may be a revenue amount. It may be number of people in your program. It may be number of bookings. If you're a speaker, right, and you want to book, say, 10 speeches a year, it might be the number of bookings as a result you want to create. It can be anything. Just make sure it's measurable and you know the deadline that you want to have it happen by. So by the end of the year, I want X to happen, right? And X is going to be a measurable number. Once you have that result that you want to create, back it up and go for the quarter that we're in. I left quarter out of there and I usually teach quarterly. For the quarter that we're in, so we actually just started July, August, September would be considered a quarter. What result do I want to create this quarter that will make my annual result more likely to happen? And get really specific and clear about what you want that result to be. Once you have that quarterly result, what is the monthly result? So each of those 3 months if I take July, I take August, I take September, and I create a different result each month and add them up together, what is going to be make it most likely that I reach my quarterly result? I hope this is making sense. So we're like backing it all up. Then once you have your monthly result that you want to create, what 4 weekly results added together will make it more likely that I create the monthly result? And then finally, we get to, if I want to create this result by the end of the week, let's say Friday, what daily results do I need to create in order to make that more likely to happen? And then I like to encourage you to pick one thing per day, just one thing. If you picked like the thing that needs to be done that would make the most make the most effect, right, for you, move the needle the most on your personal or professional result, whatever it is. What is the thing that you would be happy and proud if it's the only thing that you got done that day? Those are the 5 results a day, one a day for 5 days that you want to schedule. What we tend to do, especially when we're more neurodiverse, is go for what I call the low-hanging fruit. So the things that are easy, they're simpler, they're fast, they give us a quick hit of dopamine, but they don't actually move the needle that much. So we can keep ourselves busy. Learning is a big one because many of us are forever learners, lifetime learners. We like to educate ourselves. We like knowledge. It's a way for us to build more context. It's fine. But if we spend all of our day kind of in that place, learning and doing passive action, researching, what happens is we rarely then step into the things that are going to make the difference. And so unplanning is just choosing one thing and then focusing on that and making sure that you get that one thing done each day. So the constraint, that's where that comes in. By picking that one thing, you're constraining ahead of time, you're limiting your distractions, right? So physical environment is important. Put yourself in a space where you're limiting your distractions as much as possible. For some people, like I have some clients who are writers, or some clients who are coaches actually, and I have one in particular who creates programs every now and then, like 2 or 3 a year. When she's creating a program, she actually rents an Airbnb, she goes away for the weekend, and then 3 days later it's done. She closes out, like blocks out all distractions in her home. She's not in her home. She literally removes herself, and it's worth it for her because she gets it done in 3 days versus, 3 months maybe if she were trying to do it at home. So whatever limiting distractions looks like for you. Maybe it's just putting on sound blocking headphones. Maybe it's locking a door and saying, I'm not coming out, except for my breaks, and then nobody's coming in during this period of time. And then reward yourself. I am a big fan of rewarding yourself ahead of time. So build in time frames during your day. Once you get that one thing done, what is the reward that you're going to offer yourself? Are you going to go on a walk? Are you going to phone a friend? Are you going to listen to a podcast episode? Are you going to watch a show on Netflix? Although if it's a series, be careful. It can feel really hard to stop after one. So just really commit to, I'm going to watch one and then get back to whatever the thing is that I'm going to do next. Okay, so those are the steps in a very loose framework. Decide the result you'd like to create, personal or professional. Break the results down into annual, quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily. Focus on the one thing. I'll tell you why, because when you focus on the one thing, the likelihood of you getting it done is higher. If you do get it done, when you do get it done, you will be moving the needle. Like by the end of the week, if you look back at those rocks, I like to call them, I think it's Stephen Covey that started that system. I'm not 100% sure. But if you look back and you completed those 5 rocks, what happens is you will have come so far because you will have done the biggest, the largest, the most important things first. Once you do that, you also feel a sense of accomplishment and you gain a little bit of momentum. And then your brain kind of looks around and goes, what else can I knock out? I did the hard thing. Now what can I do? And you are more likely to move through the list of other to-dos. And your brain will automatically prioritize or gravitate towards what feels most interesting. And that's not always a bad thing. It is a gift and a skill, I believe, that people that are neurodiverse have the ability to actually follow their interest based attention and allow it to guide them. I just think many times we've become so distrustful of where it might take us. Some of it may be based in fact, but a lot of it is based in what others have said and messages that we've been fed. What I have found is interest is almost equal to intuition for me. So I use the words interchangeably. And once I've taken care of the big thing for sure for the day, I allow myself to follow my interest slash intuition. And I trust that I'm actually doing the right thing.